and welcome to another episode of Strictly History. I'm Katie.
I'm Allison.
And today we're talking about the history of animation. We're going to be specifically looking at Disney because of the innovations that Disney had created within the world of animation and just the legacy in which he had left behind after he passed away.
Yeah. And we watched the American Experience documentary
About
on
Walt Disney.
In preparation, and it was good.
Yeah, it was really good. I mean, you honestly can never go wrong with an American Experience documentary on anything that pertains to American history. So,
yeah, it made me want to watch more of them because I think it was really well made.
See?
Included a lot of information.
I highly recommend the Roosevelt documentary about Theodore Roosevelt and Eleanor and Franklin. It was very well done.
I'll have to watch that.
You should, yes. So, before we get more into Walt Disney, animation has been around for thousands of years. I mean, you can just look at the hieroglyphics of ancient Egypt, the painted amphoras in ancient Greek, the painted walls in ancient Rome. So I mean, it's you have examples of animation all throughout world history, but it's not moving animation. And there are actually 6 examples of early animation devices, which were mostly toys for children. So the first one was the magic lantern, which was made in 1603. It's essentially a mirror with a backlight source, which would have most likely have been a candle, and the images would have been projected from the candle onto the wall. And when it moved, when the lantern actually spun, it created movement of the image on the wall. The second one is a thaumatrope, which is a 19th century optical toy that featured a picture disc held by 2 strings, and when you pulled the 2 strings, the disc would spin and it would create a moving image on the disc. The third was a phanatoscope, which was made in 1833, featuring spinning painted cardboard discs reflected in mirrors, which created the illusion of movement. The fourth one is the zoetrope, which is the phanatoscope's successor. The zoetrope was a spinning cylindrical version of what the phanatoscope was doing. Then we have the kinograph, which is Latin for moving picture, also known as the flip book. We all know what a flip book is.
Yes.
It's a series of images on paper, and when you flip the pages, it makes the image or the scene move. And actually, that's been around since it was debuted in 1868. So it's been around for a very long time. And then the final device is called a praxinoscope, which was made in 1877. The praxinoscope succeeded the zoetrope, replacing the latter's narrow vertical slits with an inner circle of angled mirrors instead. So you got like a better picture against the wall or some screen or something. So animation has been around for a long time, but it's always been geared towards children. And I mean, we can see that with the earlier cartoon shorts in the early of the turn of the 20th century. It's actually the early 20th century because that's when like the first silent animated cartoon was ever made.
Yeah.
And it's not really until Walt Disney and his brother Roy Disney comes around in like the early 30s and starts making all these innovations in animation, because up until that point they've all been silent. They've been silent cartoons because silent movies were really big at the time. Sound really wasn't big yet, though it was coming. It existed, but it wasn't very good, and it was coming into the pictures, as they were called. slowly but surely. Just some quick facts about Disney, and Allison can go into more detail if she would like about Walt Disney. Steamboat Willie, which was the Mickey Mouse short that came out in 1928, was the very first cartoon to have synchronized sound in the cartoon. And then with that, you got his shorts called Silly Symphonies. So the skeleton dance, where skeletons would dance to synchronized music. In the cartoon, you had the Three Little Pigs. And then about 1932, Flowers and Trees comes out, another Silly Symphony short, and it's the first colorized cartoon.
Yeah, it's a short time frame, but a lot of, utilizing new technology.
Yeah.
To make an impact, which I thought was really interesting.
Oh, absolutely. I know that the term genius is tossed around a lot nowadays. Sound like an old lady. You know what I mean. But he truly, truly was a genius of his time. He truly wanted to make something that appealed not only to children, but also to adults. You can kick it off if you'd like to.
Well, one thing that I really thought was interesting that they talked about in the documentary was when they first made Snow White.
Yeah.
And the way, he had the idea that he thought was really important to, really tell a story through animation.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to, in the 10 years before, most of the animation was, short comedic bits.
Yeah, they were all filled with gags that were supposed to appeal to children.
Yeah.
And his drive and want and need to show that you could tell an actual story with animation was so strong that even those critics or the bankers or who have you who really thought that he was going insane and was going to bankrupt his company. It was Snow White was known as Walt Disney's was called Disney's Folly. I'm sorry, I'm really excited about talking about this, so my mouth is moving faster than my brain. And they were talking to a banker or someone who worked in the banker that gave out loans, and he wasn't really interested in giving money to something that he thought was going to be that wasn't going to gain money or be an absolute flop commercially. And it wasn't until Disney showed him drawings and the first actual what we know today as storyboards of the story of Snow White, and he was able to tell this story and utterly convince this banker to loan him a little more money to actually complete the movie.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because how many people do you know now that would actually do that, take that risk, or pitch something so convincingly to somebody for just a little more money to complete the movie? I've never heard of anybody doing that now.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, looking at what we have today in regards to animation, you take it for granted.
Yeah.
What animation can offer, and you're like, oh, of course people will want to see an animated movie and that they'll actually get the story and feel something from it.
Yeah.
But that wasn't a given then.
No. And I mean, looking at Disney now, if you only look at what has come out of his studios, from all the movies and then 2 theme parks and all this other stuff, you would think that he came from a very wealthy background, when that's just not the case at all. He actually was able to essentially live the American dream, which I think is a really great story in itself, but also I think it's so unheard of nowadays to actually live the American dream, that just to know that somebody that's so ingrained in American history and American pop culture, that he came from essentially nothing and worked and scraped and all this other stuff to make something. I mean, I truly think far exceeded his own expectations.
Yeah.
If he even had any high expectations.
Well, it seemed like he was always more sure of what he was doing. He, even when other people thought he didn't know what he was doing, he really it might have seemed like it wasn't a good idea, but he had a lot of belief in his ideas.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No, it does. It makes a lot of sense. And I think what's really great too is that his brother Roy saw his vision and like got on board to help establish the Disney animation studios. Like he wasn't an animator himself, but he was more of like the business, the financial person.
Is it okay if I chime in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's just I do think it's important to note he did not do it alone.
No.
A lot of his animators were the ones who really developed the technical breakthroughs. Ub Works, Wilfred Jackson, these guys sort of gave Disney a lot and did not receive much in return, especially Ub Works. He designed Mickey Mouse, and he was just like sort of relegated to the trash bin.
Right.
So, yeah. Walt also had a history of not really crediting his workers or treating them very well.
Yeah, no,
he was very anti-union.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into that more.
The animation strike, the animator strike in the 40s?
41.
Speaks a lot to it. But that doesn't I don't think that should ultimately take away from the fact that he gave his animators free rein to imagine doing more than what they thought they were capable of doing. You know what I mean, though, too?
Yeah, but, you could pay them.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. Yeah. I think, like, he imagined, like, an ideal world and, like, an ideal company where he was giving people a safe place to just be creative and have freedom, but that's just not how the world really works.
No, I know.
People do still need to be paid.
Yes.
And not work terrible hours to get stuff done. And it seems like a lot of that's, I mean, I think even animation now, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But especially then where everything you do is a challenge and you have a deadline.
Yeah, and I also would like to make clear as well, it wasn't just Disney that didn't really pay workers. I think it was across the board. Unions were always like anyone who tried to go on strike or unionize were not looked on very well. And I mean earlier in the 20th century, the industry owners would send like cops out to beat on the people that were striking to put them back in there to get them to go back to work. So I think unions are a fairly new thing.
I mean, the major push for American unions was like 1910s or so.
Yeah.
It coincided with the first Red Scare and that sort of thing. So I mean, they were around, and especially Hollywood was always pretty heavily unionized.
Yeah.
And just the animation sector was very not.
Right. Well, I think because animation was such a new thing, though, too, because it was only around for the first, I don't know the exact amount of years that it was that animation had been around within the motion picture aspect of it. So it's like I don't know that people knew exactly how to unionize.
Yeah. I mean, the idea I got that was like the animation industry started to unionize and Disney was at the tail end of that.
Yeah.
So it might not have been a new thing, but it was a thing that was happening.
Yes.
By the time it got to Disney.
Right.
So, I mean, you could see the writing on the wall.
You could.
In that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think one of the problems with that too, I mean, it's a whole thing, but the fact that he felt so much like the company was a family, or he felt that way, or like that they should be grateful in a way of what he was offering them, also led to a lot of heated emotions.
Yeah, a lot of confrontation. But I think, too, that could also stem from the childhood he lived as well. Like I said, he grew up on a farm. I mean, he was born in Chicago in 1901, but his father, who, from all accounts that I've ever read, was not an easy man to live with either, was a farmer by trade. They moved from Chicago down to Missouri to live on a farm. He grew up on a farm. His father would have him and Roy work odd jobs, getting up at like 1 o'clock in the morning to go to do newspaper deliveries, and ultimately this farm that his father was trying to work failed, and he moved his family to Kansas City.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that does seem like something moving away from the farm.
Yeah.
That he felt like had a big impact on his life.
Absolutely. And I think because his family was so fractured that when he built up this company and felt like, as you had said previously, that he felt the company was more of a family than a company, that when animators started striking, he felt betrayed in a certain way.
Yeah. I think that also comes from, like, when you start with a small studio, that, there's not a lot of people, it is more intimate, then, like, you might feel like those people are close to you and you have these personal connections, but by the time you're a company that has hundreds of people working there, they're not all going to feel that way. They're not all going to feel a connection to you the way like you used to feel a connection to your employees.
Right.
And then when there's...
And I mean, that's not to... What I was saying isn't... I'm not trying to take away the fact that they should have been unionized and all that other stuff, but it's just... I'm trying to show what Walt was feeling and coming from as well, because I don't think we should take that out of the equation either. So
yeah, I think they're all important parts of the conversation, because it seems like very, a situation where a lot of people had a lot of opinions about it. But yeah, so basically leading into the strike, a lot of workers were dissatisfied with their pay, and some things I was reading said there wasn't necessarily a reason sometimes why people were getting paid differently. Sometimes people might be doing the same job, but their pay was very different. And the working hours were pretty crazy. And then some people were more dissatisfied with their position in the company and felt like maybe they should be like moving up, but there wasn't any room to move up.
Excuse me.
So then, I guess in like 1940, 1941, one of the animators that was paid pretty well, Art Babbitt, he started working with the Screen Cartoonists Guild, and then he approached Disney with those union leaders asking or demanding if the company would be able to unionize, and Disney did not think that would be an okay thing at all. And I think they had a meeting where he said that they had to work, if they were dissatisfied, that they had to change things themselves and not join a union. And then because he felt so strongly that the workers were his family and that they should show a certain amount of loyalty to him that a family would, after this happens, he fires Art Babbitt because he thinks that he's been betrayed. And then it's the next day after that the strike happens. Because he fired Art Babbitt.
Yeah, it's but I mean, it's all part of running a company, and I don't remember how long this strike lasted.
Yeah, I don't know exact numbers.
Yeah, but I mean, they clearly unionized. Like, they clearly came to a compromise decision, and the animators did become unionized, and things went back to as normal as possible.
Yeah, I mean, they talked about in the documentary how Walt himself kind of had to step away from the conversations with the striking workers because it was getting too tense and it wasn't going over very well. So I think they said he went to Latin America and Roy kind of oversaw like what was going on. And in the end, the workers were able to unionize, but he never really forgot the people that spoke in favor of the unions and joined and really pushed for it. Like they talk about in the documentary as well, that he had a secretary kind of make piles of people who really wanted to join the union and others, just so he knew, who he could trust and who he didn't, and who he ultimately wanted to work in his company long term and who he didn't. So it seems like, an event that really would have changed the way he thought of this company in general.
But I mean, I think it changed for the better ultimately, because then you got, aside from the smash hit that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was in the time, because it came out in 1937, and Walt actually won an Oscar for the movie, and there wasn't a feature, an animated movie, best animated movie section in the Oscars at the time, so he won, I think, for Best Picture.
I thought it was just an honorary.
Was it an honorary?
Yeah.
It was like a cute little Oscar that had 7 little Oscars behind it.
Yeah, it's just like good job.
Pat on the back, good job. But it then led into, I mean, Snow White was such a huge success, and then unfortunately when he came out with Fantasia, and Bambi and Pinocchio, those didn't really succeed as well as Snow White.
Yeah, and like you can see like the animation in Dumbo takes a big hit compared to what was coming before it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then he made films for the U.S. government.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think also suddenly working on more than one film when you previously spent 3 years working on one does not make it easy either.
Yeah.
No. And then he decided, like, then the story of Cinderella came up. And the story of Cinderella, because it was kind of like Snow White-esque, was a huge success. Like, huge success. But just watching the making of Cinderella on YouTube, because you can find a lot of like the making of certain Disney movies, which is I highly recommend if you haven't seen any of that, because it's really interesting. The making of Cinderella took a lot of time, a lot of patience. Patience is the right word. I don't think it is. But the animators spoke about animating certain characters, and then what I found really interesting was that the voice actress for the fairy godmother was the same voice actress for the haughty elephant in Dumbo.
Oh.
And then she was also the same voice actress for Fauna during Sleeping Beauty.
That is interesting.
It is interesting. And then the voice actress for Lady Tremaine, the evil stepmother, she's frightening, was voiced by the same voice actor who played Maleficent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Utilizing a lot of the same people.
Mm-hmm. Which I thought was really cool to know that. And a lot of the animation was done with live action, from live action actors who actually modeled like movements and stuff like that for the animators. There were a few animators who didn't particularly like working that way, but it was easier for others to like get, you know, the movement of the skirt or the placement of a hand a lot easier. Just going back to Snow White for a little bit, when they were animating Snow White, the animators actually found it really hard to animate something that was more based in reality than in you know, like goofy gag cartoons, like caricatures almost. And what I thought was interesting, how the earlier drawings of Snow White, she's this like almost Betty Boop-esque character, and then she slowly evolves into the Snow White that we see on screen, which I think is really interesting. And what I also found really interesting was that they had the hardest time animating the prince.
Oh.
Yeah. And I don't really know why. They didn't really explain why it was so hard for them to animate the prince, but I also think it's because the realism that they were trying to animate in Snow White was harder in the prince than in Snow White or the Evil Queen.
Yeah, I wonder why that would be.
Yeah.
Like, what the big difference there would be. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's interesting that they found that difficult. And then when you look at, because if you notice in Snow White, the prince is hardly in he's hardly in the movie. He's only like in the beginning sequences and then the end. But then when you look at, say, like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty, you have the prince, like, I mean, Prince Charming is only half, like the latter half of the movie, but, you know, Prince Philip is throughout.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I found it interesting.
Well, I guess if it's difficult, just kind of keep him.
Yeah.
Where he doesn't need to be.
Yeah. What Disney and Disney Animation, the Disney animators were able to do for animation, just it really opened the doors for, I think, like DreamWorks and Pixar and Illumination and all these other companies animation companies that we see now. They've become more innovative in their movies and their animation.
Yeah. What I found interesting too was then in, I guess, the 40s, when the feature-length films after Snow White weren't getting the response he'd hoped for. He wasn't really getting his money back out of it. And in part I think they said was because World War II,
Right.
was going on. So
Right.
a lot of things weren't back in a normal sort of way.
Yeah, yeah.
But then he turns to live action, sometimes mixed with animation. I think
Yep.
normally kind of mixed with animation.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But-
because that's what he started doing before his company actually took off. He was making these shorts called Alice in Wonderland, and it was a live action little girl running away from animated characters. So it's not out of his wheelhouse to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just found all that very interesting.
Mhm.
Because I think the first one he did was Song of the South,
Yeah.
right? Song of the South?
Yeah. Song of the South.
Song of the South. It's like
Yeah.
Song in the South? No, Song of the South.
Yeah. Song
Um,
of the South. Yeah.
Yeah, which was very controversial when it came out, and
Yeah.
I can definitely see why.
Yeah.
It's kind of insane that they like refuse to acknowledge it, but then they built Splash Mountain, which was based on it,
Yeah.
and it's just like, well, pick one way.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and it doesn't seem like it's like all of a sudden now people realize that it's wrong. It seemed like they've known for a long time, and we're
Yeah.
trying to slowly.
I mean,
Push
they
it
didn't
away.
build Splash Mountain until like the 80s,
Yeah.
and like even
Yeah.
by then they were like, yeah, we're never releasing this one again.
Yeah.
I mean, they never released it.
It's not
Mm,
on Disney
yeah.
Plus at all.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which makes sense. But
Yeah.
even they never released it on like DVD or anything either. So
No.
it's not like it was like 2020
Mhm.
when things started, when there was more conversations about racism in media. It's like they knew way
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and what is like, and Walt couldn't understand why, because the way he saw it was that he was putting out stories that he heard growing up living in Missouri. Yeah, I guess that's all
Yeah.
I have to say about that.
And I did think it was very interesting that he was warned,
Mm-hmm.
Against putting stereotypes into the movie.
Yeah.
Specifically, they mentioned that he was told that he shouldn't portray plantation life as like a happy life.
Yeah.
But then he did,
Mm-hmm.
because he felt like his artistic vision was the way that he should go,
Right.
even if it wasn't,
Yeah.
what you should do.
Right. Right.
Which I thought it was interesting because it did make me think of, the conversations that have been had the last couple of years about
Mhm.
stereotypes in the early movies and some of the movies after too.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that they were having those conversations then too about what you should be doing
Mm-hmm.
and what you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And those things still happened.
Yeah, and I don't think that back then it was from the perspective of like social culture that you shouldn't be doing this, but like it was more of like from a business standpoint that you shouldn't be doing this kind of a thing back then.
I think the NAACP was protesting Song of the South.
No,
Yeah,
it was.
yeah.
Yeah.
There was social pressure.
Well, sure, there was social pressure, but no one, I don't think higher ups of the Times was doing it for social pressure. I think it was more of from a business standpoint, if that makes any sense.
I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the people that he spoke to about how he should portray racial issues in the movie, I don't think they were business people. I think they were people
Just
who were affected
general
by certain
people.
things.
Yeah.
I don't remember who. I should have written that down. But like people like the NAACP. I don't
Right.
know if it was specifically people who worked at the NAACP.
Yeah.
But people like that in organizations that they knew like they had the right ideas.
Right.
And they're speaking from a historical viewpoint
Yeah, yeah.
and a cultural viewpoint, and they
Yeah.
really knew
Yeah.
what was harmful.
Well, I mean, they did boycott the movie. The movie didn't do well at all.
Yeah.
So
Which, yeah, I mean, it's a controversial take.
it is
So.
a controversial take, and it's I think it's one of a few controversies in I don't want to say in general Disney, but in animation as a whole, because there's a lot of caricatures.
Yeah.
I
So.
think
Yeah.
Warner Brothers handles it pretty well when they come to addressing that stuff.
Yeah.
They put it out pretty much with just like tags on it being like, yeah, this is very racist material.
Yeah.
And it was bad then. It's bad now. But like we can't deny it happened.
Yeah.
And here it is. We're owning up to it, and hopefully this is presented in an educational way to help prevent things like this from happening in the future.
Yeah.
And Disney Plus has warnings now.
Yeah.
For those
Though,
movies too.
It's very odd. They put it
Is
on
it?
some things and not others. Because like occasionally, because like The Simpsons is on there, and I love The Simpsons, but like occasionally, you know, there's some pretty stereotypical gags.
Yeah.
Especially involving like Apu and stuff.
Mm.
And no warnings on that, but every episode of The Muppet Show has a giant warning, and it's like, huh?
Yeah. Well, I think it's because they're going off of like the notion that a lot of people know The Simpsons and know what The Simpsons are about, and you know that's like you can control parental, like parents can control what their kids can and cannot see. So I mean, it's
and I wonder how much of it is what the company feels responsible for making.
Yeah.
I don't know though.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who's making those decisions.
Yeah, it's the higher ups that are making those decisions for sure.
There's also just some odd gaps in Disney Plus that bother me. Like, there's a lot of older Mickey Mouse cartoons are just not there. It's like, I don't know if it's just like, oh, they're like a little too weird and dark, or if it's just, but it's just like, why not? Just throw them up.
Yeah, yeah.
What's preventing you from putting the Mad Doctor up on Disney Plus?
Right. I mean, I've noticed that as well, because when I was growing up, I would go to like video stores. Video stores were actually a thing, and I would rent a whole bunch of like Disney shorts, and I'd see a lot of like the Mickey Mouse shorts and the Goofy shorts and the Donald Duck shorts, and I look now on Disney Plus, and a lot of stuff that I grew up watching isn't there. So I mean, like, there's this one Donald Duck short that I used to watch where he and Daisy are going on a date, and Daisy gets angry at him for blowing up on something that's really insignificant. So she starts dating this other, more refined duck, and it's all about Donald trying to win Daisy back, which he succeeds in doing. But I've tried to find that short on Disney Plus, and I haven't been able to find it.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen a lot about how they decide, you know, what older things to include. Do you have anything else you want to say about like that or anything?
I don't think so. I think we like covered pretty much. I think the last thing I would like to say is that after watching, like, because me and Simona spoke about the making of Sleeping Beauty from Disney Animation, and you can see that that episode on the Fairy Fable Librarians. It's a bittersweet ending because knowing that Disney passes away from lung cancer in '66, it's like the last major animated movie that he was ever part of. Because yes, he worked on Mary Poppins after Sleeping Beauty, but that's mostly live action with a little animation thrown in when they jump into the portrait that Dick Van Dyke's character had drawn on the street. But to know that Sleeping Beauty was like the last major animated feature film that he worked on is a little like bittersweet when the movie ends. At least for me. I can't speak for anybody else.
Yeah, I didn't know that. But yeah, I think especially for you because you are a fan, like it would be bittersweet.
Yeah.
Do you guys know anything about like his original plans for Epcot?
Yeah,
No.
it was supposed to be this showcase of what?
He wanted it to be like a full city.
Yeah.
But no one could own property there.
Right.
So they would not have municipal voting rights.
Oh.
Yeah.
And people would just come into your home and update your technology for you. And like most of the profit would be to live there. You had to work at one of the things in the area, which was pretty much only the Magic Kingdom. It's just a really wild plan. Like,
yeah, I mean, I used to know what the acronym for Epcot actually used to stand for, but I can't remember.
There's an amazing Defunct Land video about it that I highly recommend.
Yeah, but I like what Epcot has been
Become.
made into.
It seemed like he really was a fan of a working community. Like, he really wanted some extent of his workers living where they worked.
Yeah.
Which doesn't... I don't think it seems like it could work out very well.
Right. At least for the time of like the 60s, the early 60s, late 50s, when Disneyland was being made.
Yeah, it just seems like, you're living where you're working, but you're working so hard for not much.
Yeah.
It just seems like it could get like toxic very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think in general, it seems like those things never work out.
No.
Throughout history, whenever there's some sort of community, little town where the workers live and work, it just never works out.
Well, I mean, it did kind of for Carnegie, because his workers who worked in his iron mills actually had a small community that lived right within walking distance of his factories.
Mm. But was it a good thing?
I don't know. Just a small example of it working to some extent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I also wanted to talk about, because I thought it was really interesting when they brought it up in the documentary, was that he did testify in front of the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Mm-hmm. And this was, like, I think 6 years. It was in 1947, so 6 years after the strike.
Yeah, yeah.
But he clearly still felt, betrayed and wronged by his workers who pushed to unionize, because those were the people that he did name. Mm-hmm. And even if he didn't have evidence that they were communists, some he thought weren't, but he said they could be, or in some world, they might as well be communists.
Yeah. Well, I think also because back then unionizing was kind of seen as being communist in some aspect, not fully, but some. So it doesn't surprise me at all that he would honestly go to the committee to testify against workers that he felt betrayed by.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just interesting because, like, at that time, there were other people in Hollywood called to testify, but they refused and were penalized and blacklisted for it. Yeah. But he chose to speak with them and work closely. Yeah. I just thought that was really interesting.
I read like something that, like, he may have been involved with Hoover to an extent, and, like, was passing the FBI information throughout the years.
Yeah, I was just reading. It seemed like he did work very closely with the FBI, even, like, offering them, like, a space, like, in Disneyland to kind of push their agenda a bit.
Well, I will never quite understand his concept for amusement parks. They worked out pretty nice, but, like, I don't know. He wanted a lot of things to come in one place. He was just like, all right, you got the teacup ride, then you got the FBI headquarters.
Yeah, big ideas. Big fan of the FBI, I guess, and what they were doing.
I can't really speak to that because I don't really know that much about it, but.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he was very, very against communism, and
I think though, like, a lot of people back then were staunchly against communism. I think, like, also McCarthy in the 50s. Yeah,
40s, 50s.
Yeah, I think everybody was. I didn't really need to be, but that's just my opinion.
It's interesting because of the way he embraced it.
Yeah.
Because not every celebrity embraced the Red Scare the way he seemed to. Yeah. I don't really know where that comes from. Obviously he's very anti-union, so that's all, like, connected. But
I mean, I think really for some people that's all that needs to connect somebody to try and stop to be involved in something that's really just a little bogus, but that's just Yeah.
Yeah. And from what I was able to find, nobody that he named was found actually to be communist, but either way, you know, their careers were affected and they were unofficially blacklisted from the industry. Yeah. Which is what was happening a lot, at the time.
Yeah, and it wasn't just, like, the animation studios, but it was movie studios. I mean, I think, like, people like Trumbo was blacklisted, though he was able to get his screenplays made into movies just under aliases, which I thought was really clever. But yeah, a lot of big named screenwriters and directors and actors
Like
were.
Charlie Chaplin.
Charlie
is one of them.
Chaplin was blacklisted. So yeah, it
he wasn't
affected.
even allowed back into the country.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, so it affected everybody.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that the documentary, they did include everything.
Yeah.
Positives and negatives
Yeah.
of his life and his career. And
Yeah, I think that's why I like American Experience documentaries, because they do that. It's an equal showing of positives and negatives to like a person or an industry. So I really, this is why I recommended that we see it, because it's I think it's a good showing of the man as he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like most people, very complicated.
Yes. Yeah. And I would like to correct myself. The Roosevelt documentary is not an American Experience documentary. It's a Ken Burns documentary.
Oh, okay. Still good. Still good.
Still really good.
Yes.
So I still really highly recommend it. But yeah.
I think that's everything I had that I really wanted to mention.
I mean, if any of our viewers want to know more about Disney more in depth, I highly recommend the American Experience documentary. It's very thorough. It's unbiased, I think.
I thought they did a good job of being unbiased.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of good like Walt Disney bios that have come out. I have one. I don't remember the author's name, which I should have because it's really good. So yeah.
And they also have on the American Experience YouTube.
Yep.
You can watch a few shorts without having to find the documentary online.
Yeah.
If it's not available to you.
Right.
There's some other short clips you could watch if you want to know more.
Yep. And any other last thoughts?
I think that's it.
Okay. And thank you for joining us this afternoon for our episode. And please like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.